In a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood where everyone knew each other's business, James and Michelle lived what appeared to be the perfect life. Their home was modest but cozy, with flower beds lining the front yard and laughter often echoing through their windows. James, a tall man with kind eyes and an infectious smile, had made a name for himself as one of the most talented architects in town. His designs weren't just buildings, they were works of art that people admired from afar. Michelle, on the other hand, was different from anyone else James had ever met. She was sharp-witted, ambitious, and carried herself with a confidence that turned heads wherever she went. People noticed her, not just because of her striking beauty, but because of how effortlessly she commanded attention. James and Michelle's love story wasn't like those you'd find in fairy tales. There were no grand gestures or dramatic declarations. Instead, theirs was built on mutual respect, shared dreams, and countless late-night conversations about everything under the sun. They had been married for 5 years, and during that time, they had created a life filled with joy, laughter, and unwavering support for each other. But despite their happiness, not everyone in their community saw their relationship the same way. It all started innocently enough, with harmless comments, here and there. At first it was subtle things, like when someone at a dinner party asked Michelle why she didn't work outside the home. "Oh, I'm sure being married to James keeps you busy," one woman joked, her tone light but laced with judgment. Michelle simply smiled politely and changed the subject, refusing to engage. Other times, it was more direct. At the local golfy club, a group of men would gather after a round of golf to talk shop, and inevitably the conversation would turn to James. "You know, Jim, your wife seems, well, let's just say she's quite the catch," one of them said once, winking suggestively. The implication was clear. They thought Michelle was using James for his success and financial stability. The whispers grew louder over time. Some people claimed that Michelle came from nothing, that before meeting James she hadn't achieved much in life. Others speculated that her expensive wardrobe and polished appearance were signs that she was living beyond her means. And then there were the harsher accusations, that she was a gold digger, someone who had deliberately set her sights on James because of his wealth and status. These rumors spread quickly, fueled by envy and misunderstanding. To some, Michelle's confidence was intimidating. To others, it was suspicious. Why would such a smart, capable woman choose to stay out of the spotlight? What was she hiding? For James, hearing these things was difficult. He loved Michelle deeply and trusted her completely. Whenever someone brought up the topic, he brushed it off, telling himself that people were just being petty or jealous. After all, Michelle had never given him any reason to doubt her loyalty or intentions. Still, the constant chatter began to wear on him. It wasn't just the words themselves, it was the way they lingered in his mind, planting tiny seeds of uncertainty. Was it possible that he didn't know everything about her? Could there be parts of her past that she hadn't shared with him? Michelle, meanwhile, remained unfazed by the gossip. She had always been aware of how people perceived her, especially in social circles like this one. Growing up, she had learned to navigate spaces where others judged her based on appearances rather than substance. So when the whispers reached her ears, whether through friends who meant well or acquaintances who didn't, she chose not to react. Instead, she focused on what truly mattered, her relationship with James and the life they were building together. If people wanted to talk, she reasoned, let them talk. Their opinions wouldn't change who she was or what she stood for. But even though Michelle tried to ignore the negativity, it wasn't easy. Every snide comment, every sideways glance felt like a small weight pressing down on her shoulders. She wondered if James noticed too, if he believed the lies being spread about her. More than anything, she wanted him to trust her without question, to see her heart and know that she loved him for reasons far deeper than material wealth. Yet, as the days passed, she couldn't shake the feeling that something had shifted between them. The ease and comfort they once shared now seemed tinged with tension, as if an invisible wall had risen between them. One evening, as they sat together on the couch watching TV, James turned to Michelle with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever feel like we're being judged? he asked suddenly, breaking the silence. Michelle paused, caught off guard by the question. What do you mean? She replied cautiously. James hesitated before answering. I don't know. Maybe it's nothing. But sometimes, I can't help thinking about what people are saying about us. About you. His voice trailed off, leaving the room heavy with unspoken emotions. Michelle looked at him, her heart sinking. For so long, she had hoped that their bond was strong enough to withstand external pressures. Now, she realized that the whispers had crept into their home, threatening to undermine the foundation of their marriage. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This wasn't the moment to confront the issue head-on, but she knew that sooner or later the truth would have to come out. Until then, she resolved to stay patient, trusting that James would see through the lies and recognize the depth of her love for him. Little did either of them know the storm brewing around them was about to reach its breaking point, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same again. The tension between James and Michelle didn't explode overnight, but it simmered quietly beneath the surface of their everyday lives. For weeks, James carried the weight of the rumors in his mind, unable to shake off the nagging thoughts that had taken root there. He tried to push them aside, reminding himself of all the reasons he loved Michelle. The way she supported him, the kindness she showed to others, the laughter they shared. But the whispers from outsiders kept creeping back into his thoughts. It was like a splinter lodged deep under his skin, small, yet impossible to ignore. One evening, James and Michelle prepared to attend a charity gala hosted by one of James's oldest friends, Richard. The event was an annual affair, held at a lavish hotel downtown, and it always drew a crowd of well-dressed guests eager to mingle, network, and show off their generosity. As Michelle slipped into a sleek black dress and carefully styled her hair, James watched her from across the room. She looked stunning as always, but tonight, something about her presence felt distant. Maybe it was the way she avoided meeting his eyes or the quiet sighs she let out while adjusting her earrings. Whatever it was, James couldn't help but feel that the invisible wall between them was growing thicker. When they arrived at the gala, the atmosphere buzzed with energy. Crystal chandeliers sparkled above the dance floor. Waiters glided through. The crowd carrying trays of champagne and soft jazz music floated in the background. James and Michelle exchanged polite greetings with familiar faces, smiling for photographs and making small talk. But as the night wore on, the tone of the conversations began to shift. At first, it was subtle. A raised eyebrow here, a sly comment there, but soon it became clear that some of the guests were determined to stir the pot. It happened during dessert. James found himself seated at a round table with a group of acquaintances, including Richard and a few other couples from the neighborhood. The conversation started innocently enough, with everyone discussing the success of the fundraiser and marveling at the auction items up for grabs. But then someone brought up Michelle. "So, Jim," said a man named Greg, leaning back in his chair with a smirk, "how's married life treating you these days? Still enjoying the perks of having such a glamorous wife?" James forced a laugh, trying to brush off the comment. "Michelle's great," he replied simply, taking a sip of his drink. "Couldn't ask for better." Greg chuckled, clearly not satisfied with the answer. "Oh, come on, man. We all know how it is. A woman like that, smart, beautiful, always dressed to impress. It must be nice, huh? Though I gotta say, I've heard some interesting stories about her." The table fell silent for a moment, the air suddenly heavy with anticipation. James felt his stomach tighten. "What kind of stories?" he asked, his voice calm but edged with caution. "Well," Greg continued, leaning forward conspiratorially, "you know how people talk. Some folks think she might have ulterior motives, if you catch my drift. Like maybe she's not exactly who she says she is." James clenched his jaw, anger bubbling beneath the surface. Before he could respond, another guest chimed in, a woman named Patricia, who prided herself on knowing everyone's business. "Honestly, James, I'm surprised you haven't wondered about it yourself," she said with a shrug. "I mean, where did she even come from? No one really knows much about her past, do they? And let's face it, she doesn't exactly seem Like the type to settle down in a place like this unless there's something in it for her. The words hit James like a punch to the gut. He glanced toward Michelle, who was standing across the room chatting with a group of women. Her smile was bright, her posture relaxed, but he couldn't help wondering if she could sense the venom being directed at her from afar. Forcing himself to stay composed, James shook his head. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said firmly. "Michelle's none of those things. She's loyal, hardworking, and—" "Hardworking?" Greg interrupted, raising an eyebrow. "Come on, Jim, be honest. Does she even have a job, or does she just live off your paycheck?" That was the final straw. James stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "Enough," he snapped, his voice low but sharp. "If you've got something to say about my wife, say it to her face, otherwise keep your opinions to yourself." Without waiting for a response, he turned and walked away, leaving the table in stunned silence. He found Michelle near the bar, sipping a glass of sparkling water. When she saw the look on his face, her expression softened. "Are you okay?" she asked gently, setting her drink down. James hesitated, unsure of how to put his feelings into words. Finally, he sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "I'm sorry," he said. "I shouldn't have let them get to me. But they were saying things about you. Things I know aren't true." Michelle nodded slowly, as if she'd been expecting this moment all along. "What did they say?" she asked, her voice steady. "They called you—" James trailed off, struggling to repeat the accusations. "They called you a gold digger. They said you only married me for my money." For a brief moment, Michelle's mask of composure slipped, revealing a flicker of hurt in her eyes. But just as quickly, she masked it again, her expression unreadable. "And what do you think, James?" she asked quietly. "Do you believe them?" "No," James exclaimed immediately, reaching for her hand. "Of course not. You're nothing like that, but sometimes I can't help wondering if there's something you're not telling me, something I should know." Michelle pulled her hand away, her gaze dropping to the floor. "Maybe there is," she admitted softly. "But it's not what they think. And I'll tell you everything. Just not tonight. Not here." The rest of the evening passed in a blur. James tried to focus on the festivities, but his mind kept replaying the conversation at the table and Michelle's cryptic words. By the time they left the gala and climbed into the car, the tension between them was palpable. Neither spoke as they drove home, the hum of the engine filling the silence. When they finally reached their driveway, James turned to Michelle, his heart pounding. "Whatever it is," he said earnestly, "you can trust me. I love you, and I want to understand." Michelle looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and determination. "I know," she whispered, "and I'll explain everything. But when I do, it's going to change everything for both of us." With that, she stepped out of the car and headed inside, leaving James sitting in the driver's seat, his mind racing with questions. He had no idea what Michelle was about to reveal, or how it would turn their world upside down. But one thing was certain: the cracks in their perfect life were widening, and soon, the truth would come tumbling out. The days following the charity gala felt like they stretched on forever. James couldn't shake the image of Michelle's face as she'd spoken those cryptic words in the car, her voice steady but tinged with an emotion he couldn't quite place. Was it sadness, regret, or maybe something else entirely? Whatever it was, it lingered in his mind, gnawing at him until he could barely focus on anything else. Meanwhile, Michelle seemed unusually quiet, retreating into herself in a way that made James feel even more uneasy. She wasn't distant exactly, but there was a guardedness about her now, a sense that she was holding back, waiting for the right moment to reveal whatever secret she'd been carrying. Finally, one crisp Saturday morning, Michelle broke the silence. As James sipped his coffee and flipped through the newspaper, she walked into the kitchen wearing jeans and a simple sweater, her hair tied back in a loose ponytail. It was a rare departure from her usual polished appearance, and James looked up surprised. "Do you have time to meet me somewhere today?" she asked, her tone calm but firm. Of course, James replied quickly, setting the paper aside. Where do you want to go? There's a cafe downtown, Michelle said. It's quiet, private. I think it'll be the perfect place to talk. James nodded, though his stomach churned with anticipation. He had no idea what this meeting would entail, but he could tell from the seriousness in Michelle's voice that it was important. After grabbing their jackets, they drove to the cafe in near silence, the hum of the car engine filling the space between them. When they arrived, Michelle led him to a corner table by the window, where sunlight streamed through the glass and cast warm patterns on the wooden surface. She ordered tea for herself and coffee for James, then pulled out a slim folder from her bag and placed it on the table. This is why I wanted to meet here, she began, her hands resting lightly on the folder. Her voice was steady, but James noticed the faint tremor in her fingers as she spoke. I've been thinking about how to tell you this for a long time, but I didn't know where to start, so I decided to show you instead. James stared at the folder, his heart pounding. Slowly, he reached out and opened it. Inside were documents, pages filled with numbers, charts, and official-looking seals. At first glance, they seemed like financial records, but as James skimmed through them, his eyes widened in disbelief. These weren't ordinary bank statements or tax forms. They were records of massive charitable donations made under Michelle's name. The amounts listed were staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars given to various organizations over the past decade. There were contributions to education initiatives, medical research foundations, community development projects, and disaster relief efforts. Each entry was meticulously documented, complete with dates, recipients, and detailed descriptions of the impact the funds had made. What is this? James stammered, looking up at Michelle. How did you... My parents... Michelle interrupted softly, her gaze steady. They were entrepreneurs. They built a successful business from scratch and left me everything when they passed away. I inherited their fortune years ago before I met you, but I never told anyone. Not my friends, not my colleagues, and definitely not the people in our neighborhood. I chose to live modestly because I didn't want my wealth to define me. Instead, I used it to help others, to make a difference, in ways that mattered most to me. James sat back in his chair, trying to process what he was hearing. The woman sitting across from him, the same woman who had been accused of being a gold digger, of living off his money, was actually one of the wealthiest people he'd ever known. And yet, she had chosen to keep it hidden, dedicating her resources to causes that improved lives without seeking recognition or praise. But why didn't you tell me? James asked finally, his voice trembling. Why didn't you let me know any of this? Michelle sighed, her expression softening. Because I wanted you to love me for who I am, not for what I have, she explained. When we first met, I saw how genuine and kind you were. You treated me like an equal, like someone whose value wasn't tied to material things. And I fell in love with that version of you, the man who saw beyond appearances and trusted his instincts. If I had told you about my inheritance early on, I worried it might change how you saw me. Maybe you would have doubted my intentions just like everyone else does. Her words hit James like a wave, washing away the lingering doubts he hadn't even realized he'd been harboring. He thought back to all the times he'd defended Michelle against the whispers and accusations, insisting that she wasn't what people claimed. Yet deep down, he had allowed those voices to plant seeds of uncertainty in his mind. Now, faced with the truth, he felt a mix of emotions: shame for doubting her, awe at her generosity, and admiration for her strength in keeping such a significant part of herself hidden. And what about now? James asked quietly. Why are you telling me this now? Because I can't keep pretending anymore, Michelle admitted, her voice breaking slightly. I hate the way people look at me, the way they judge me based on lies and assumptions. But more than that, I hate that you've had to carry the weight of their opinions too. You deserve to know the truth, James. Not just about my past, but about who I really am. I'm not perfect, and I've made mistakes. But I've always tried to use what I have to make the world a better place. That's who I am. Whether people believe it or not. Tears welled up in James's eyes as he reached across the table and took Michelle's hand in his. "I'm so sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I should have trusted you completely without question. I should have seen through the lies and stood by your side no matter what. But I promise, I'll do better. I'll never doubt you again." Michelle smiled faintly, squeezing his hand. "Thank you," she said simply. "That means more to me than you'll ever know." For the rest of the afternoon, they sat together in the cafe, talking openly for the first time in weeks. Michelle shared stories about her parents and the lessons they had taught her about humility, hard work, and giving back. She explained how she had carefully chosen which organizations to support, visiting schools and hospitals to see firsthand the impact her donations had made. James listened intently, marveling at the depth of her compassion and the sacrifices she had made to stay true to her values. By the time they left the cafe, the air between them felt lighter, as if a heavy burden had been lifted. James walked beside Michelle, holding her hand tightly, feeling a renewed sense of gratitude for the woman he had married. He realized now that Michelle wasn't just strong, she was extraordinary. And while the road ahead wouldn't be easy, not with the rumors still swirling around them, he knew they could face it together, united by trust and understanding. They drove home. James glanced at Michelle, his heart swelling with love and respect. For so long he had admired her confidence and grace, but now he saw her in a new light, as someone who had carried unimaginable burdens with quiet dignity. Whatever challenges lay ahead, he vowed to stand by her side, supporting her every step of the way. Because in that moment he understood something profound. The true measure of a person isn't in what they own or how they're perceived. It's in the choices they make and the lives they touch. And by that measure, Michelle was nothing short of remarkable. The days after their conversation at the cafe marked a turning point in James and Michelle's relationship. For the first time in weeks, they felt like they were truly on the same page again. The weight of secrets and misunderstandings that had been building between them began to lift, replaced by a renewed sense of trust and connection. But Michelle knew that showing James the documents wasn't enough. Not if she wanted to fully erase any lingering doubts or prove her commitment to him. She needed to take things further, to demonstrate just how deeply she valued their marriage and partnership. A few days later, Michelle suggested they visit her private banker together. It was a bold move, one that required vulnerability on her part, but she believed it was necessary. "I want you to see everything," she told James as they prepared to leave the house. "Not just the donations, but the entirety of what I've kept hidden all these years. You deserve to know the truth, and I want there to be no room for uncertainty." James nodded, though his mind raced with questions. He still couldn't wrap his head around the magnitude of what Michelle had revealed. How could someone so wealthy choose to live so modestly? Why would she keep such an enormous part of herself concealed? As they drove to the bank, he found himself replaying their conversations over and over in his mind, trying to piece together the full picture of who Michelle really was. When they arrived at the sleek, modern building housing Michelle's financial institution, they were greeted by a sharply dressed woman named Evelyn, Michelle's longtime banker and confidant. Evelyn ushered them into a private conference room adorned with polished wood furniture and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city skyline. After exchanging pleasantries, Evelyn turned to Michelle. "Are you sure about this?" she asked, gently, clearly aware of the significance of what was about to happen. Michelle nodded without hesitation. "Yes," she replied firmly. "It's time." Evelyn opened a leather-bound folder and began explaining the details of Michelle's finances. What followed left James utterly speechless. The numbers were staggering, far beyond anything he had imagined. Michelle's inheritance wasn't just substantial, it was vast, rivaling the fortunes of some of the wealthiest families in the country. Yet, instead of using it for luxury cars, extravagant vacations, or flashy displays of wealth, she had quietly channeled most of it into charitable causes. Billions of dollars had flowed through her accounts over the years, funding scholarships, medical breakthroughs, and humanitarian efforts worldwide. As Evelyn walked them through the records, Michelle added context, sharing stories behind some of the contributions. There was the scholarship fund she established in memory of her parents, which had helped hundreds of low-income students attend college. There was the hospital wing named after her mother, providing cutting-edge treatment to underserved communities. And then there were smaller, more personal initiatives. A community center in a struggling neighborhood, a program supporting single mothers, and even anonymous gifts to individuals facing financial hardship. Each contribution told a story of compassion, thoughtfulness, and a desire to make the world a better place. James listened intently, his heart swelling with pride and admiration. He had always known Michelle was special, but this revelation took his understanding of her to a whole new level. Here was a woman who could have lived a life of opulence and excess, yet chose instead to dedicate her resources to helping others. Her humility and selflessness were nothing short of extraordinary, but Michelle wasn't done yet. Once Evelyn finished presenting the overview, Michelle turned to James with a serious expression. "There's something else I need to do," she said, pulling out a pen and a stack of official-looking papers. "I've thought long and hard about this, and I've decided to transfer half of my fortune into a joint account with you. Not because I feel obligated to, but because I want you to share in this responsibility, to help me decide where our resources can make the biggest impact." James stared at her stunned. "You don't have to do that," he protested. "This is your money, your legacy. I don't want you to feel like you have to include me." "It's not about obligation," Michelle insisted, her voice firm but kind. "It's about partnership. We're a team, James. Everything I have is yours, just as everything you have is mine. Besides," she added with a small smile, "I think we'll make a pretty great philanthropic duo." Touched by her words, James didn't argue further. Together they signed the paperwork, officially merging their financial futures. As Evelyn stamped the final document and handed it back to them, James felt a profound shift within himself. In that moment he realized that their marriage wasn't just about love, it was about shared values, mutual respect, and a commitment to making a difference in the world. On the drive home, James struggled to find the right words to express what he was feeling. "I don't know how to thank you," he said finally, glancing at Michelle, "for trusting me with this, for letting me see this side of you." "You don't need to thank me," Michelle replied softly. "Just promise me one thing, that we'll use this opportunity to create something meaningful together. Something that reflects who we are and what we stand for." "I promise," James said, his voice filled with conviction. "We'll do amazing things, Michelle. Together." The following week, James noticed a change in Michelle's demeanor. She seemed lighter, freer, as if shedding the burden of secrecy had given her a new lease on life. They spent hours discussing their plans for the future, how they could expand existing programs, launch new initiatives, and collaborate with organizations aligned with their vision. For the first time in years, Michelle allowed herself to dream big, knowing she had James by her side to support her every step of the way. However, the outside world hadn't changed overnight. The whispers and rumors continued to swirl, fueled by ignorance and jealousy. Some people dismissed Michelle's generosity as a PR stunt, while others accused her of trying to buy James's loyalty. But neither James nor Michelle paid much attention to the noise. They knew the truth, and that was all that mattered. One evening, as they sat together on the couch reviewing proposals from various charities, James turned to Michelle with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever regret keeping this hidden for so long?" he asked. "If you'd told me sooner, maybe none of this would have happened." Michelle shook her head. "No, I don't regret it," she said honestly. "Yes, it was hard keeping it to myself, and yes, it hurt when people judged me unfairly. But going through this has taught us both something important, that trust isn't just about believing someone blindly. It's about standing by them even when things get messy. And now that we've come out the other side, I think we're stronger than ever." James smiled, reaching for her hand. "You're right," he said. "We are stronger. And no matter what anyone says, I'll always stand by you. Because you're not just my wife, you're my partner, my best friend, and the most incredible person I've ever known. Michelle leaned her head against his shoulder, a contented sigh escaping her lips. For the first time in a long time, she felt truly seen, not just by James, but by herself. The journey ahead wouldn't be easy, but with James by her side, she knew they could face anything. Together they had weathered the storm, emerging stronger, wiser, and more united than ever before. The months that followed Michelle's revelation brought changes, not just in James and Michelle's lives, but in the way people around them perceived them. Word of Michelle's immense generosity eventually made its way into the public eye, though not by her doing. It happened during a televised charity gala hosted by one of the organizations she had funded for years, a medical research foundation dedicated to finding cures for rare diseases. As part of the event, the foundation's director took the stage to thank their largest benefactor, whose contributions had allowed them to expand their facilities and accelerate groundbreaking studies. Tonight, we want to take a moment to honor someone who has quietly transformed our work. The director began, his voice filled with gratitude. This individual has chosen to remain anonymous until now, but we believe it's time the world knows about their incredible impact. Through her generosity, countless lives have been saved, and families have been given hope when they needed it most. Please join me in thanking Michelle Thompson, a true champion of humanity. The camera panned to Michelle seated among the audience as applause erupted throughout the venue. She looked momentarily startled, caught off guard by the unexpected recognition. Beside her, James squeezed her hand, offering silent support. For a brief second, Michelle considered leaving the spotlight entirely, but then she remembered why she was here. This wasn't about her. It was about the people whose lives had been changed because of the foundation's work. With a deep breath, she stood up and walked to the stage, accepting the microphone with grace. "I never sought acknowledgement for what I've done," Michelle said, her voice steady despite the nerves bubbling beneath the surface. "In fact, I've always believed that giving should come from the heart, without expecting anything in return. But tonight I'm reminded of something important, that sharing stories of kindness can inspire others to do the same. So while I may not crave the spotlight, I will use this platform to remind everyone watching that each of us has the power to make a difference, whether through large donations or small acts of compassion. Together, we can create a brighter future for all." Her words resonated deeply with the audience, earning a standing ovation. The speech went viral almost immediately, shared across social media platforms and news outlets worldwide. Suddenly, Michelle's name became synonymous with philanthropy and humility. People marveled at how someone so wealthy could live so modestly, dedicating her fortune to causes that mattered, rather than indulging in luxury. The very same individuals who had once labeled her a gold digger scrambled to retract their accusations, praising her instead as a role model and humanitarian. At first, Michelle found the sudden attention overwhelming. Strangers approached her in grocery stores and coffee shops, thanking her for her contributions or asking how they could follow in her footsteps. Journalists called incessantly, seeking interviews and photo opportunities. While Michelle appreciated the positive shift in perception, she remained grounded, redirecting the focus back to the organizations and communities she supported. "This isn't about me," she would say whenever reporters pressed her for details. "It's about the people doing the real work, the doctors, teachers, volunteers, and advocates, making the world a better place every single day." James watched as Michelle navigated this new reality with poise and authenticity. He admired how she handled the praise with humility, refusing to let it inflate her ego or distract her from her mission. At home, they continued working together on their shared vision, reviewing proposals, visiting project sites, and brainstorming ways to maximize their impact. Their partnership flourished, strengthened by open communication and mutual respect. Where once there had been doubt and misunderstanding, there was now unwavering trust and admiration. One evening, as they sat together on their porch watching the sunset, James turned to Michelle with a thoughtful expression. "Do you ever think about how far we've come?" he asked. "From those whispers at parties to where we are now, it feels like a lifetime ago." Michelle smiled softly, leaning into him. I do, she admitted. And honestly, I wouldn't change a thing. Those challenges taught us both valuable lessons about trust, resilience, and what really matters in life. Now we have the chance to build something meaningful together, something that reflects who we are and what we stand for. You know, James continued, his tone playful yet sincere. Most people probably wouldn't expect a couple like us to end up running a mini empire of good deeds. We're just two ordinary people trying to make a difference. Michelle chuckled, nudging him gently. Ordinary? I beg to differ. We might not wear capes, but we're definitely superheroes, in our own right. Their laughter echoed into the twilight, a testament to the bond they had forged through adversity. Over time, James and Michelle became known not for their wealth, but for their commitment to uplifting others. They launched initiatives aimed at empowering marginalized communities, providing resources and opportunities to those who needed them most. Whether it was funding scholarships for underprivileged youth, building affordable housing, or supporting mental health programs, their efforts touched countless lives. Perhaps the most rewarding aspect of their journey was seeing the ripple effect of their actions. Inspired by Michelle and James's example, friends, neighbors, and even strangers began stepping forward to contribute in their own ways. A local teacher started a free tutoring program for struggling students. A retired engineer volunteered his skills to design sustainable infrastructure for underserved areas. Even the gossip mongers from their neighborhood, who had once spread cruel rumors about Michelle, organized fundraisers and charity drives, eager to align themselves with the couple's mission. Through it all, James and Michelle stayed true to their values, prioritizing compassion and integrity above all else. They understood that their wealth was a tool, not a status symbol, and used it wisely to create lasting change. Though the scars of mistrust and judgment lingered briefly, they served as reminders of how far they had come and how much stronger they were together. In the end, the whispers faded, replaced by admiration, for Michelle's selflessness, for James's loyalty, and for the love that bound them. Their story became a beacon of hope, proof that even in a world often clouded by cynicism and envy, kindness and truth could prevail. And as they stood side by side, hand in hand, gazing toward the horizon, they knew they had built something extraordinary, not just for themselves but for generations to come.